The ultimate Purrely deck list has been posted, and this is part 2 to that video. How to side deck with the ultimate Purrely deck list. Now you're in for a treat because this is going to be quite a long, informative video on the approach to how to side deck with this deck. Now, side decking is one of the most skillful things within Yu-Gi-Oh! I've given you the deck list in part 1 of the video, and if you haven't watched that video yet, I highly recommend watching that before you watch any of this. Look below in the description, or just click this here. My name is Jake Quinsee. I have over 60 regional wins, 30 premier tops. I'm a coach on Metafy. If you are wanting a more intensive look of side decking or how to deck build, then check out Metafy, and you'll get a one-to-one session from me there. Now, this deck list will help you along the way leading up to the new regional season and the YCS season. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I've missed out on in terms of what decks to compare against with this specific list. I will comment below with the changes you should make, or if there's a lot of suggestions, then I'll make an entirely new video to follow up from this video. Now, we need to remember that this whole deck list has been built around Crossout Designator. So the cards that we put in from the side deck into the main deck post game 1 will mean they need to be working with Crossout Designator. It will make sense along the way we go, but also I want you to keep in mind that cards that are usually bad going first are much better going first with Crossout Designator, and the cards that would usually tend to be pretty bad for us going second will now be pretty good for us in the main deck when we go second, because these are the cards we want to play around against our opponent, and with Crossout Designator we can just negate the effect. So for example, Nibiru. Nibiru wouldn't be very good for us to have in our deck when we go first, but if we're playing Crossout Designator in our deck list, then we don't want to get Nibiru. So we need to have Nibiru in our deck list to be able to call Nibiru, the primal being, when our opponent tries to Nibiru us. It's really important then that we are playing certain cards to help us when we are going first and when we are going second, even when those cards won't be very good generally when we go first or going second. All right, so that was pretty important. The side deck is used to alter your deck list to make it look and be better against different matchups in the game. If you knew you were going to play against Kashtira in a tournament in 12 rounds and you're going to play all Kashtira, your main deck for every game 1 will be broken against Kashtira because you're going to make it be very good. But you don't have that luxury because you can't decide what decks you're going to play against in the rounds of the tournament. Now, you can usually figure out what you're likely to play against in the early to late rounds, but that's a completely different video if we go into that. What you want to do with side decking is you actually want to see the deck as a completely different deck list game 2 and game 3. Use your side deck as a tool. It's one of the most powerful tools within the game. There's a lot of skill in it, but because so many players don't understand what to side in and side out, you're making your deck list inconsistent. The amount of times you'll see a pro player lose game 1 but always come back and win game 2 and 3, that happens all the time. Why does that happen? Because the player that you're playing against is less experienced with the side deck, and they're siding out cards they shouldn't be siding out, which means their deck list for game 2 and 3 is going to be less consistent than their opponent's deck list. So if you win game 1 and you're the inexperienced player and you're against the pro player, you're going to probably side out certain cards you shouldn't be siding out, maybe consistency cards. You're going to find that you're going to brick more often than you should usually if you're playing a game 1, because in game 1 you might have got a deck list from someone and that's already consistent. What use is that side deck for game 2 and 3 if you don't know what you're siding in and out? So it's really important that you know what cards you should be maining and siding with for game 2 and 3. Because if you make that mistake and you side incorrect cards, what's going to happen is your deck's going to be inconsistent. You won't have sided in the correct cards. You won't have sided out the correct cards. Then you're going to lose more games than you should. In a long round tournament, so like a YCS, which is now usually 12 rounds because the amount of players that play this game, it's going to actually affect you in the long run, which means you're going to bubble a lot more than you should, which means you could probably top a lot more. But because you're making these few mistakes, you're not going to get to the bubble, or you're not even going to top because you're making your deck more inconsistent for game 2 and 3. And if you lose game 1, now you're even more screwed and you're likely to lose the match then after losing game 1 against a pro player because they know what they're siding in and they know what they're siding out. All right, guys, let's get straight into the video. So here we go. I've separated the deck and the side deck so it's easier for you to understand and retain the information. Now, there's quite a few things to cover, and in this part, I'm going to make sure it's just easier for you to understand before we start going into the decks. So this is the main deck, this is the side deck, and here's the extra deck. If you look at the main deck, we've got the Purrely cards, and we've got the non-engine cards, and we have the talents here, which is part of the main deck. With the Purrely cards, we aren't changing those. We're not touching these. These are always going to be the same. And even the talents you'll always want to keep in the deck. So this 24 here is always staying the same no matter what. Whether you're going first or second, you're always keeping them in. The thing with talents is it's always going to be good when you open it because you're not drawing multiples because you're only playing one, so you can't brick on it. And when you see it, you can either draw 2 cards when you go first or look at your opponent's hand. And when you go second, you can either draw 2 cards or you can take an opponent's monster. Also, the implication of this card in this deck that's even better is because we're playing cross out, we can't get talents back. By playing one of these cards, it's essential in combination with cross out. Because this is the 40 card main deck and this is the side deck, we're going to be wanting to put some of these cards in exchange for these cards in game 2 and 3 against certain meta decks. And those will change when we go first and go second, but not like other decks. When we go first with other decks, we usually don't want to have Nibiru in the main deck. But in this instance, because we're playing cross out, we do, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which I would recommend going back to listening to if you haven't, and if you skip straight to this part. You want the engine to be able to carry you throughout the tournament, and the non-engine pieces to be the power pieces and the cards to slow your opponent down as well. If you have no engine in your opening hand, and you just have a bunch of hand traps and Book of Moons, etc., you won't be able to play. Yes, you'll be able to disrupt your opponent, but how long can you do that for? Yes, until you draw something. Potentially, you might be able to come back into the game. It's likely your opponent's going to have an interruption back for that one card you're going to top deck. So you can't afford to cut any of these 24. These cards are just set in stone. They're non-negotiable. They're sticking. Now I'm going to go into what decks you should be siding against and how you should be siding against them. Okay, so against Kashtira going first, we need to think about what cards do we want to include and bring in from our side deck into the main deck. So if we look at them, we can see Shifter is definitely a big piece of it because we're playing Designator. So we definitely want to include this. So this is going to be one of the cards we're definitely including. Now, rule of thumb against every single deck, when we side deck in game 2 and in game 3, we're always going to put IP from our side deck into our extra deck. It's always going to be in there because of Contact C. We can't risk it. But the cool thing is we know we're going to be going first or be going second in the game. So we can side out a card that's not very good when we go first, or we can side out a card that's not very good when we go second from the extra deck for IP, just to prevent us getting Contact Seed. So this is always going to be included no matter what against every matchup, game 2 and game 3. In the Kashtira matchup, we're going to be siding in this when we go first. And then we're going to be siding in the free Cosmic Cyclone. So we're going to put these 4 in, as well as IP. We're not going to put Barrier in against Kashtira. I'm not really a huge fan against that deck because we're making XYZ monsters ourselves. And if we just turn our opponent's XYZs off, they could just summon a bunch of monsters on the field, which can be problematic for us. And we don't want to be turning off our XYZ effects. So against that deck, I ideally don't want to be putting in Dimensional Barrier in against it. In exchange for these, we can't take out the Impermanence because Kashtira plays that. We can't take out the Moonlit Chill because Kashtira plays that. We can't take out the Eclipse because Kashtira plays that. We can't take out the Book of Moons because that's the best card against that deck when we go first, because we can Book of Moon their first special summon monster. Designator explains itself. So the only space we can really take out then for these 4 cards comes with either the Ash Blossoms or the Drollbirds. Now our opponent's definitely going to be having Ash in their deck and Drollbird. The only thing we can really do here is take out 2 Ash, 2 Droll. And then we're going to include the free Cosmic, and then the 1 Shifter. And then for the IP, we're going to take out the Slacker Magician because we're not going to need to make this at all when we go first, because from this point, we're going to be making different XYZ monsters, and we should have some sort of presence against our opponent when we go first. So the likelihood of us needing to make this during this game is very low. So then we'll put this in, and this is how our deck would look like going first against Kashtira. Now, what would it look like going second against Kashtira? If you like this type of content, I've got a lot more planned along the way. I'm sure this content will help you grow as a player, and you'll become better, and you'll win more, etc., etc. So if you like this type of content, or if you have friends that would like this type of content as well, feel free to click that subscribe button, turn the notifications on, and also just share this to your friends, or even just one friend. And that way the channel can grow, more content can be made, and you'll improve even more as a player. All right, back to the video. So going second against Kashtira, it's really important to know that we need to now start including cards that could really hurt us when we go second, such as Dimensional Barrier and Eradicator, Epidemic Virus. A lot of Kashtira decks now have started siding 3 copies of this, and they side it against Purrely because of how good it is, and also in the Kashtira mirror match because they can call spells, and even against Labrynth because they can call traps. So we're expecting to side this in, and we're definitely expecting to side Barrier in. Remember, we have to put Barrier in every time we go second against every deck whilst we keep cross out in the main. The reason is we are going to get barriered, and when we do get barriered, we're going to auto lose from that point usually. So we just have to automatically include it. Remember though, if you are going second and you're drawing to 6 and you're playing a 40 card deck, there is a 15% chance that you're going to open the singular copy of Dimensional Barrier or the singular copy of Epidemic Virus. If you know your opponent's definitely siding 3 Dimensional Barriers, then you might want to consider siding 2 barriers when you go second, because the likelihood of that is much lower. It's less than 2% because for you to physically draw both copies. And you might think, well, why, Jake, why would I want to put 2 traps into my deck when I'm going second? Well, the cool thing about this deck is you're not penalized completely by putting these cards into the deck, because you can just discard them for the quick play spell. So what do we side in and what do we side out with this? So we definitely want to include the Nibiru's, because Nibiru is really strong against this matchup. So we definitely want to include Nibiru's. We don't want to put the Shifter in now, because if they're going to have Shifter, they would have shifted us in their turn, because their graveyard now would have a few cards in it. So they're never going to ever shifter us during our first turn in the game when it's turn 2. So we're going to put in the 2 Nibiru's, the 1 Barrier, and the 1 Eradicator, and of course the IP, just in case. So what are we going to take out for the IP? So here we're going to take out the Assemble Robin, the IP. So these two are going to swap places. So this is in there now, and this is in our side deck. And then we're going to have pretty much the same again. Now you might think I'm crazy, but we are going to take out 2 Drolls and 2 Ashes. And you're going to think, Jake, surely these cards are really good against Kashtira. Now, yes, they are, because you would use the Ash Blossom against the Theosis, and usually your opponent's going to struggle. Or you would go Drollbird against the Field Spell, which is broken. It's game over. But the thing is, we need to remember with this deck list is we are putting in cards which are much better against that matchup, and also it lets us play because we're playing cross out. Otherwise, the other alternative we could do is we could take out the crossouts completely and entirely, and then keep these in. You got to think about as well, Book of Moon is amazing when we go second against Kashtira. So is Eclipse. So we want to keep those cards in. The Nibiru, now that we're playing 3 in this, your opponent's going to have a very hard time playing, because you got to think about the mathematics here. We're going to have the 1 Eclipse, we've got 3 books, that's 4 cards. We have 3 Nibirus, that's 7 cards. We have 7 cards plus the draw and plus the Ash. We have 9 cards against our opponent. Plus we have the talents, which is 10. They're going to be really good against our opponent. And we're keeping the Imperm and the Mourner in case we do get Mournered or Imperm by our opponent, so we can cross out it. It's very hard to put in or to take out cards for these because of how good these cards are already against Kashtira. So even game 1, we've got a very good matchup against that deck. But by putting these 2 in, it just prevents us from losing against that deck all entirely. Against Purrely, going first in game 2 and game 3. Purrely's going to be very popular in the 2023 and 2024 season because it's unlikely to get hit on the ban list. Now, it might get a few hits and a few limitations, but nothing compared to Kashtira, because we're expecting a Rise Heart to get banned. So looking at the deck list, going first, a lot of these cards are going to be very, very good against them. So we've got Droll that's going to be very good against them when they go first on their turn, and we've got a higher likelihood of seeing this card, as well as Ash Blossom, because we'll be drawing multiple cards in their standby phase. But Book of Moon's very good in the mirror match, very, very strong. Crossout, obviously insane, plus Eclipse, Mourner, Impermanence. But Nibiru is terrible. That's probably the worst card in this matchup. So Nibiru is definitely coming out. Another card that I'm going to take out is 1 Book of Moon. And then the other card I'm going to take out, so it's either between Ash Blossom or 1 Droll and Lockbird. Now the reason why it's one of these 2 is because we're going to be drawing multiple cards during our opponent's turn. So we should have multiple cards of interruption against our opponent. So here I'm probably going to take out the Ash Blossom, because Drollbird literally just stuns them for the turn. They can't abuse Happiness, and it's just game over. So I'm going to take out the Ash. I'm going to take out the Nibiru. I'm going to take out a Book of Moon. And the reason why we're keeping the Eclipse and at least 1 Book of Moon in the main deck is in case our opponent does it to us in a standby phase on our Baby Gnaw, so we can just Designator, banish one of these, so then we can still rank up, make our big Gnaw, and then draw multiple cards. So we're taking these 3 out. We're going to put the 3-dimensional barriers in. And then we're going to take out the Slacker Magician for the IP, just in case we get Contact Seed, but it's very unlikely in this matchup. Now what do we do going second? So going second against Purrely is so straightforward, super easy, and we only really want to include one copy of Dimensional Barrier into our main deck, so we can banish it with Crossout Designator against our opponent. But you probably will find you're going to be using this to banish this against the mirror match, to start them making a big noir, and then you can just fully combo off. So what are we taking out for the Dimensional Barrier? We are taking out the one Nibiru. And the reason why we're doing this is we still want to include it in the deck list, because if we regain partial control during our first turn in turn 2 of the game, then we can then win with Barrier. Or there's going to be a point where in the grind game, we have already used this with this, or we already use this with this, and then we want to use the other copy of Designator to banish the other copy. So we're going to then take out the Nibiru for the Barrier, and then we're going to swap the Slacker Magician, or even the Robin for the IP, and keep Slacker Magician in. Slacker Magician is going to be very good in the mirror match when you go second, because it can just prevent itself from being targeted with Book of Moon, and then you can make a Zeus, nuke the board, which will be very helpful. There is an argument as well where you could put Feather Duster into the deck, because your opponent should have Street Face up. They should have My Friend Purrely up, but their face downs, yes, they might include Book of Moon. However, though, if there's not really much space to include Duster, I would recommend putting it in if you know your opponent's going to be putting cards in like Summer Limit, for example, rather than cards like Dimensional Barrier. So there is the other argument is don't put in the Barrier and then put in the Harpy's Feather Duster. Okay, so what we're going to do against Branded. Now we're going to be going first against Branded either game 2 or game 3. So the cards we definitely want to be including is the free Ghost Spell and the 3-dimensional Barrier if we go first, and then the one copy of IP. So IP is always going to be coming in again. So IP then will be replacing the Slacker Magician. So IP is in here, Slacker Magician is out. The free Barrier and the free Bell are going to be coming in. The cards that aren't very good against this matchup is going to be Drawbird, and even the Book of Moons aren't very good, because if we do Book of Moon a monster that they control, they can still use that monster as a fusion material, which can be problematic. Having the odd Book of Moon is quite nice, because if they do have a big monster in the grind game, we can book it, attack into it, make a big noir, and then win the game from there. But I don't want to be having like 4 copies of books into the deck. So for this reason, I'm going to take out the 1 Eclipse, the 2 Book of Moon, and the 3 Drawbird. These 6. Then I'm going to include the free Barrier and then the free Ghost Spell. 40 cards. And I think this will be very effective against Branded going first. Now, what would we do going second against Branded? It's quite straightforward. So we're always going to be wanting to put Ghost Spell in against that matchup. We're going to be wanting to put in the 2 Nibirus, and obviously we're going to be wanting to put in 1 Barrier. And the Barrier isn't for us to use against them with its effect, it's for cross out. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking out the 3 Drawbirds and the 3 Book of Moon. I'd rather keep Eclipse in rather than a single copy of Book of Moon, because this can put all the monsters face down, which will be very helpful, because then we can just attack into the monster that's not Mirror Jade. So we're booking the Mirror Jade plus another monsters, and we can attack into the non-Mirror Jade to make up a big noir. Then we're going to put in the 2 Nibirus. That's 2 spots. We're going to put in the 3 Bell, so that's the 5 spots out of the 6, and the 1 Barrier. Then, of course, still we're putting in IP. So when we go second, we're going to be taking Robin out, and then keeping Slacker in, and putting IP in there. So this is how the deck's going to look going second against Branded. So now against Labrynth. Labrynth's very popular. It's dominated the German scene. It's dominated Euros. It's got a very high conversion rate if you're a solid player with the deck. So we obviously need to be concerned and worried about Labrynth. So going first against Labrynth, we're going to be wanting to put in the Ghost Spells in against that deck. We're going to be wanting to put the 3 Cosmics in, the Duster in, and obviously the IP. So again, for the IP, we're going to take out the Slacker Magician and put IP in. And then we're going to be waiting to take out the Drawbirds, not very good against that deck. The Nibiru, not very good against that deck, because what are you going to Nibiru? The Mourner, not many lists are playing Mourner in that deck. And actually quite a lot of the Labrynth decks aren't playing Impermanence. So that's the 6 spots there. And we probably are going to take out a cross out just because we want to keep max copies of Ashen, max copies of the books in, because if we get skill drained and when we attack and make a Zeus, we can go Zeus effect, detach, they can chain skill drain, or if they have skill drain face up, we can then book our Zeus and it will nuke the board. So that'll be very good. So then we're going to put in the free Ghost Spell, the free Cosmic Cyclone, and the one Duster. So these 7 for these 7. And then obviously the IP for the Slacker Magician. So that's what we're going to be doing going first against Labrynth. Now, what are we going to be doing going second against Labrynth? So going second against Labrynth is quite different to going first. Now, the few differences is when we go second against it, they're likely to set up an Eradicator Virus or a Dimensional Barrier, which is very problematic for this deck. And also, we're going to have cards that we need to include, such as back row removal against the skill drain, because now skill drain can be flipped up against us on our first turn because our opponent went first in this game. So with this being said, we then want to definitely still include the Ghost Spell because it hits the Welcome Labyrinth Trap. We then want to include the free Cosmic, the Feather Duster. So this 7 is definitely coming in. And then the additional 2 cards is going to be the Dimensional Barrier and the Eradicator. So we got 1, 2, 5, and 9. So what are we going to take out? What are the 9 cards? So yeah, we're still taking out this 7. This 7 isn't very good. Actually, we're going to keep in the cross out. We're going to keep the free cross out in. So we're going to take out this 6. And then the other cards we're going to take out then is we are going to take out the 1 Eclipse. We are going to take out a singular Book of Moon. Because like at the scenario I mentioned, if we do go first against Skull Drain, this time we have the free Cosmics in as well as the Feather Duster, which we had before. But in terms of space, these are the cards we'd rather take out because now Designator gains more value when we go second against that deck because they're more likely to be set up with Eradicator Virus or Barrier. Whereas when we go first, those cards won't be set up. And we're going to take out the talents because it's not going to be very good against the matchup. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we're putting in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then in terms of the IP, again, we're going to put this in and take out the Robin, keep the Slacker Magician in, and then we've got IP in there. This is what we're going to be doing against Labrynth. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was long, I know, and most of you probably didn't even watch it fully. If you haven't, I definitely recommend doing that and going back to the beginning. But if you have, I appreciate all of you. I hope this video has helped you. And if you have any suggestions for any type of other videos you want to see from me in the future, then feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what type of content and what type of video you'd like me to make moving forward. All right, guys, Jake Quinsee out.